In this video, I'm going to share with you 3 ways you can be bolder towards your future self. And if you start being 10 times bolder, then what's going to stop you? We live in a world where most people are afraid to do anything. Psychologists have broken up all motivations into 2 core forms. One is approach motivation. The other is avoid motivation. Basically, everything you do as a person is to approach something you want or to avoid something you don't want. And as a rule, most people are avoid oriented because they're operating based on fear. Most people, probably 80% of the population, according to a lot of research, is that fear is their primary driver. They're afraid to rock the boat, afraid to be misunderstood, afraid of being rejected. And so most people are avoidance oriented, and that's true of both of their future and their past. They avoid big traumas. They avoid opening up about the things that hurt them. They avoid telling the truth about their desired future self. And if your whole life, or at least 80% of your life, is avoidance oriented, then you're not being very bold. You're actually being extremely timid. You want your life to be approach oriented, where not only are you approaching and transforming your past in powerful ways, but you're approaching a desired future self and making massive, courageous, committed leaps towards that, and being very humble. Part of having a growth mindset is you're really excited to fail. You embrace failure. You're learning from failure, and you know you can turn any experience into learning because you also know that your future self is a different person than you. When you have a fixed mindset, you've over-identified yourself, you've over-identified your potential, and you're too afraid to fail because you're trying to prove yourself. Whereas if you have a growth mindset, you are massively seeking failure. You're seeking bigger and bigger and bigger failures, and you're not afraid of owning your failures in the past. Principle number 1 of being radically, massively bolder in 2023 so that you can get 10 times bigger or more results is being 100% honest, ruthlessly honest about your past, ruthlessly honest about your fears, and ruthlessly honest about your future self. This makes you bulletproof. This makes you dynamite. Admittedly, my father used to be an extreme drug addict when I was growing up. He did all sorts of drugs and he was in a state of depression. He's actually recently come out of that. And he even was an addiction recovery mentor and sponsor for a period of time. But he talked about how a big aspect of coming out of your addictions is letting all of your ghosts out of the closet. I love the quote, all progress starts by telling the truth, but also you're as sick as your secrets. As a person, you are as sick as your secrets. One of the things that makes you psychologically bulletproof is to be ruthlessly honest about your past, ruthlessly honest about your biggest mistakes, errors. That's a big aspect of having a growth mindset, is admitting that you've made mistakes and not holding yourself hostage to your past. You and your past self are 2 different people. And so as you're reviewing, call it the year 2022 or other things, be open and radically honest about the biggest mistakes you made. You could even be open and honest about the things you struggle with. Be open and honest, be fearlessly honest. Once you start living with extreme radical honesty, then you're no longer hiding from reality. You're no longer hiding from the truth. And so all progress starts by telling the truth. And so if you can start owning the truth, then you're no longer living in deception to yourself or to other people. Admittedly, fully honestly, in 2022, I made some of the biggest gains in my life. I experienced some of the biggest transformations. I wrote 2 books, Future Self, Be Your Future Self Now. And also recently I wrote a book called 10X is Easier Than 2X. It's my 3rd book with Dan Sullivan, which we're publishing in 2023. But I've had my biggest growth in learning, but I've also admittedly made my biggest and even some of my dumbest mistakes, but they're not dumb because they were failures. They were me trying and stretching. And honestly, my past self was ignorant compared to my current self. I love the quote from Alain de Botton. He said, if you're not embarrassed by who you were 12 months ago, you didn't learn enough. One of the things that's been helping me lately with my wife, we're currently doing therapy. We also got a brand new accountant. And part of being accountable is being honest, being accountable and honest with what you've done. And so I'm being very honest and accountable about some of the dumb mistakes that I made, big mistakes. And if you're willing to just own it, then you become psychologically bulletproof. Also, then you can actually start advancing, growing, and improving because you're no longer lying about anything. So if you want to be bolder in 2023 and move forward faster, be ruthlessly honest about your past, ruthlessly honest about your mistakes, ruthlessly honest about your fears, but also ruthlessly honest about your desired future self. This is one of the things that I learned from Mr. Beast and studying Mr. Beast is that he was very open and honest about his future self all along the way. There were many videos that he published back in 2015 when he was a 17-year-old kid talking about his dreams of becoming a famous YouTuber. And he would publish those videos and he was having very open and honest conversations about his future self. Your identity is the story you tell about yourself. And if you're avoidance based about your goals and your dreams, then how are you going to make progress towards them? You want to make your identity your new story, and you want that story to be your future self. So part of being ruthlessly honest is being ruthlessly honest about your future self. Don't be ashamed of your future self. Don't be shy about your future self. Just fully admit who you want to be, what you want to do, because if that's going to become your future self, if that's going to become your reality, then there's no hiding it. So be honest about your past, transform your past, learn from it, gain from it, be honest about your fears. Be open and honest about your concerns, your worries, especially to very close people, key people. honest about your mistakes, your fears, but also honest about your dreams. The more honest you are, the bolder you can be, the less afraid you are about what other people think. The more you have no ghosts in your closet, the more you become psychologically bulletproof. Number 2 aspect of being more bold is create bolder work. I love the concept from Cal Newport. He said, be so good they can't ignore you. That's actually a quote he got from Steve Martin, who's the famous comedian. But if you want your work to be really good, the riches are in the niches. You can't try to appeal to everyone. If you're trying to be everything for everyone, then you're going to be in the middle of the bell curve, and ultimately that's going to kill all quality. And so you want to be bolder in your work. You want to think from the perspective of your future self. You want to create really deep, really epic work that's so good it can't be ignored, but also that you're going for the, for a very specific group of people. You're not trying to be everything for everyone. You're trying to be someone specific for a group of people, and you're fine getting lots of haters. You're fine getting lots of people who don't agree with you. Everyone will have people that don't agree with them. And if you're trying to avoid bugging people or avoiding being misunderstood, then you're not being bold enough. You want to be insanely bold towards the people that matter. And as something I've learned from Seth Godin, anyone that's outside of the core audience you're speaking to, their opinion doesn't matter because you didn't make the work for them. And so you want to make work that's so good it can't be ignored. You want to make work that's so bold, so powerful for a very specific person, and don't worry about anyone else. And the bolder you are, the deeper you go, the higher quality you go, and the more, honestly, just insanely bold, your work's going to be very successful. You got to get yourself to the mindset of that. One thing that I learned when I first started blogging on medium.com back in 2015. I blogged from the perspective of my future self. I blogged from the perspective that I was going to become a professional author. And within 3 months, I wrote a blog post that was read by 10 million people. And then I ultimately became the top blogger on medium.com for 3 years, from 2015, 16, 17, and some of 18. But you want to be bold. You want to just own it. You want to own your future self, create from the perspective of your future self, become so good you can't be ignored, and don't worry about the people who are outside, the people you're trying to serve. Their opinion doesn't matter. You didn't make it for them. So be so good you can't be ignored. Create work that's so good it can't be ignored for a very specific person. Don't go for the middle of the bell curve, because that's where your work is going to be shallow, because you're ultimately operating too much out of fear. Only speak to a specific person, the person you really want to work with or help, or create work for a very specific person that's very bold. You want to also create opportunities with huge promises that are so big they scare you. I love the quote that you want to have a purpose that's so big. If your purpose doesn't make you cry, it's not big enough. But also, you want to pursue work that's so big it terrifies you, and you have to actually grow into it. There's a concept called the Pygmalion effect in psychology, that basically we rise to the expectations of those around us, but also we rise to the concept that we commit to in our mind. That's our identity. And admittedly, I like taking on tasks and challenges and opportunities as a forcing function that are so big it terrifies me, but the commitment transforms me. So be bolder in your work. Be so good you can't be ignored. The third way to be bolder is to go for no. So this is something I've mentioned in other videos, but that is a great book. Go for no. Yes is the destination, but no is how you get there. If you go for bigger and bigger no's, eventually you'll start getting yeses at the level of your no's. And so go for bigger and bigger no's every single day. Pitch yourself to this, that, like actually ask for opportunities. Get better at getting yeses, but also get better at getting bigger and bigger no's. If you're not getting big no's regularly, then you're obviously not stretching your limits. Like if you're always getting yeses to whatever you're requesting or recommending or just doing, then you're obviously not stretching your boundaries. In that book, Go for No, the author tells a story. It's kind of a parable, but in that story, he talks about a young man, and this was back in like the 80s, but a young man who sold suits at a men's suit store. And a guy came in and bought like a ton of stuff. It was the biggest day of this young salesman's career. He was blown away. And after he sold it, he got this big commission, but he went to his manager and said, "You won't believe what just happened." And he just told his manager all the things it sold. And then his manager said, "Well, yeah, but how many things did the guy say no to?" And the young man was like, "Well, none." And the manager was like, "So that means you never actually offered anything to him except for just what he wanted. I mean, you got no rejections, which means you don't actually know what he would have bought." And so ultimately, the young salesman realized he has no idea how much that guy would have bought, because he never actually offered him anything beyond what the man just picked for himself. So you will never know what's available to you if you're not getting no's. If you're not stretching and getting no's, and if you're always just getting yeses to life, then what that means is you're not actually testing the outer borders of what's possible to you. So these are 3 beautiful concepts that if you apply in 2023, you will be enormously bolder. So much of life will open up to you. One is just being radically honest about your past, your fears, your mistakes, your dreams. Number 2 is creating work that's so good it can't be ignored, operating from the perspective of your future self, being blunt, honest, bold, to a very specific type of people. The riches are in the niches. Be very clear and committed, and don't worry about what other people outside of that think. I love the quote that, the truth is like a cutting edge sword. And then ultimately, number 3 is go for no's. Test the outer limits, because you don't know what's actually possible to you if you're not getting rejected. And ultimately, you lose nothing by getting rejected except for massive learning. So apply these 3 concepts in 2023, get 10x the results, have no ghosts in your closet, have a constant ceiling that you're stretching, and then ultimately be so good you can't be ignored.